Johnny Carson named 6 movie stars with terrible acting chops. For 30 years, Johnny Carson sat behind the desk of The Tonight Show. Carson not only entertained a nation, but influenced it as well. A word of approval meant a quick jumpstart for a struggling showbiz wannabe. But a withering put-down from Carson would pop a Hollywood star's inflated ego in an instant. What amazed many in Carson's audience was that television's most congenial guest conducted a show rather than a series of interviews. What went on when the cameras were shut off and the audience went home remained a surprise to many. Johnny had an encyclopedic knowledge of film and theater, says a former Tonight Show producer who worked with Johnny for over a decade. He could spot a limited actor in an instant. Although he was relentlessly polite in front of a camera, he actually had a short list of stars he thought were awful actors. Carson's opinions were not grudges or personal pet peeves, but rather informed views of a man who had interviewed nearly every major star of the great generation and had seen them come and go over a lifetime, honing a keen sense of judgment when it came to separating talent from mere celebrity. He thought a special corner in hell was reserved for gorgeous people who were given acting contracts purely on their appearance, says Carson's head writer. Before he ruled late nights on America's television screens, Johnny Carson was a devouring student of performance. Growing up in Nebraska during the Great Depression, he took refuge in movie theaters whenever he could muster up enough money to get in, and he developed a lifelong passion for films. Everybody forgets Johnny's background in magic, clarified a former executive producer of Carson's Tonight Show. Magic is an education in how to detect deception, how to distinguish when a guy is creating an impression or really doing something. Well, Johnny used that skill all his life in acting. When Carson took over The Tonight Show in 1962, he had very refined sensibilities. For the very first time, these 6 stars from Hollywood's golden age Carson privately thought were the most talent-challenged to reach major star status will be named, starting with a man whose name symbolized poor acting performance. Number 1. Sonny Tufts. Suffering Sonny Tufts. This cry, common in cartoons threatened with calamity, would surely bring laughs to movie audiences of the 1940s. The joke wasn't arbitrary. Carson had in mind an actor he considered perhaps the worst to have achieved true stardom during Hollywood's golden years. Carson had a strange fascination with Sonny Tufts, so says his ex-head writer. Carson collected Tufts films in the way some people collect train wrecks, sometimes screening them in writing sessions for the benefit of the writers in attendance to illustrate how a man so obviously inept might reach stardom. Sonny Tufts had all the right credentials. He was Yale-educated and hailed from a preeminent Boston family. Tall and handsome, Paramount Pictures scooped him up during World War II, when most leading men were off fighting in the war, providing a chance for new leading men to step into the spotlight. Tufts simply didn't have a smidgen of acting talent, in Carson's opinion. Carson's Johnny would do spot-on imitations of Tufts, broadening his shoulders, setting a blank face, and delivering lines with not a smidgen of feeling. Carson often brought up Tufts in monologues during the 1960s and 1970s, keeping faith with Sonny Tufts' reputation despite being a flash in the pan with stardom status relegated to a distant memory. He'd end a monologue with a smirk and chuckle through a sarcastic comment such as, "And we all know Sonny," leaving audience in stitches with a laugh and a summary of Tufts' complete lack of talent. Carson considered Tufts a shining exemplar of the cynicism of Hollywood's studio system, lending a pretty face to fool spectators into thinking they have a star in front of them. Looks don't have to prove talent. They'll fool them all. Number 2. Jane Mansfield. The bombshell with a face and a voice, but no acting talent whatever. During her appearances on The Tonight Show, Carson always greeted Jane Mansfield with courtesy and charm. Behind her beauty and her bright smile, Carson saw a complete actress with no talent whatever. She's a human publicity stunt, Carson told a Tampa Tribune reporter of a private dinner with a Today Show publicist. There's no there. Carson disliked most of all Mansfield's complete lack of interest in improving her acting abilities. With Marilyn Monroe, he knew she worked hard to hone her craft, consulting coaches and instructors to improve her performance. With Mansfield, he assumed they were content to be Jane Mansfield. Carson loved lovely ladies with brains and talent, such as Julie Andrews and Sophia Loren, said a former producer. What Carson hated were those who just used their beauty, and Mansfield symbolized this. Carson observed how she avoided serious questions with stories or come-ons. Then she would laugh or feign ignorance, but this Carson termed the empty arsenal of a non-actor in private conversations with me, Carson explained. Carson considered Mansfield to have a knowingly clever mind. She understood enough to do better, but simply chose not to, making her lack of talent all the more frustrating for Carson. Number 3. Tab Hunter, Hollywood's pretty empty vessel. Every aspect of Hollywood's star system bothered Carson about Tab Hunter. Very attractive with blonde hair, blue eyes, and a chiseled face, Hunter quickly rose to become a teen idol in the 1950s against Carson's assessment of a deep lack of acting talent. Writers who worked with Carson remembered Carson disapprovingly watching Hunter's films, saying they gave him line after line, movie after movie, and he never improved, not even by accident. Hunter had guest appearances on The Tonight Show in the 1960s and 1970s, and Carson interacted with him cordially each time. Behind the scenes, Carson frequently remarked on Hunter's emptiness in front of an audience. He acted with his jawline. Carson quipped with a grin in front of his staff. Carson thought the secret to Hunter's popularity was simply people projecting their fantasies onto a blank slate. The less personality he showed, the better teenagers could see him in a role of their ideal boyfriends. Ironically, Carson's subsequent assessment of Hunter may have relaxed had he lived to read Hunter's biography in 2005, where he confessed in an autobiography to being gay during the time he was a teen idol, being forced to present a false front to avoid being rejected by Hollywood because of this. As a contrast to Carson's stiffness, Carson in the Tonight Show period thought Hunter a perfect illustration of a television-made star whose face eclipsed any talent he may have had. Number 4. Myrna Van Doren, Assembly Line starlet. Where Johnny Carson saw in Jane Mansfield a frustrating lack of dramatic talent, in Myrna Van Doren he beheld a gag, a poor copy of a poor copy. Where Van Doren reflected Hollywood's very calculating attitude towards producing a female star. She gives cardboard expressive face, Carson chuckled during a backstage analysis, with his staff following Van Doren's appearance on The Tonight Show in the late 1960s. What Carson meant, wrote Carney Asylum's biographer, was simply a lack of talent. Carson, in other words, saw in Van Doren the very worst of Hollywood's old studio system. While Marilyn Monroe was a sensation, studios were quick to try to produce their own blonde bombshells. The first being Jane Mansfield at 20th Century Fox, then Van Doren at Universal. While each new model, in Carson's assessment, had less and less acting chops. Carson had a theory concerning the production line of blonde bombshells, as explained by his former talent coordinator. He had a theory concerning the production line of blonde bombshells. Johnny would talk about how they began with Marilyn Monroe, with talent in addition to packaging. Then they produced Jane, with packaging but very minimal talent. But when they produced Van Doren, they didn't try to look for someone with talent. All they were searching for were her measurements and her blonde Baroness coiffure of platinum hair. One thing Carson found especially disturbing in Van Doren was her apparent inability to deliver simple dialogue convincingly. Number 5. Tony Curtis, From Brooklyn to Ancient Rome. Unlike most of the other acts Carson placed on this list, Curtis did grow up into a performer Carson truly admired. But his early career stage shows, especially in notorious historical roles, were a continuing source of Carson's mirth. The phrase, "Yes, the castle of my father," spoken in a heavy Brooklyn accent by Curtis playing a knight in 1954's The Black Shield of Falworth, epitomized Hollywood miscasting in Carson's eyes and was a phrase he returned to again and again. Carson had a soft spot in his heart for Curtis, a fact stated by a longtime associate. Here was a kid from the Bronx with a thick accent, but Universal continued to cast him in roles as Vikings, Arabian princes, and knights. Johnny thought this comical and slightly brilliant. What was interesting in Curtis's case, however, was witnessing how he fulfilled potential from pretty boy to accomplished actor. While other actors in Carson's 10 Worst Actors in Hollywood never seemed to do better, Curtis worked diligently to transform talent into reality. Hollywood will forgive an accent quicker than a crowd will, Carson judged Hollywood actors. Those early appearances were a source of comedic irritation for Curtis, but Carson considered him a good sport when he needled him with gentle jabs about early weaknesses. Carson considered Curtis a serious actor by the 1970s, but a good sport with a thick hide when it came to early missteps. Number 6. Zsa Zsa Gabor, the ultimate non-actor. Carson's critique of most limited actors involved their inability to successfully convey a character, but Carson's evaluation of Zsa Zsa Gabor had a slightly different bent. Zsa Zsa did not attempt to act. Instead, she simply acted as Zsa Zsa in whatever role she found herself in. Zsa Zsa Gabor consistently appeared on The Tonight Show to widespread comedic effect, but her traits were exactly the same in each and every film performance, with nary a thought given towards becoming a character. Reportedly, Carson stated she had made a wise choice early in her career to be a Zsa Gabor rather than spending time learning to act. Carson citing profit over skill. What Carson found interesting in Gabor was her acceptance of this model. While other limited actresses were trying to prove their dramatic chops, she happily did whatever they were doing in her own clothes, in her own environments. Her style and accent were unchanged from playing a high society woman to a pioneer in a Western. Carson loved her authenticity. She skipped the middleman and went straight to playing herself and cashing her check. Carson loved her in reality, as a Tonight Show guest, even in spite of his critical evaluation. She had found a niche in which she neither had to possess traditional actressing talent, but in which she attained immortality. Carson's personal views on these 6 performers, Sonny Tufts, Jane Mansfield, Tab Hunter, Myrna Van Doren, Tony Curtis, and Zsa Zsa Gabor, show Carson to be more than a man of personal preference. His views are a gauge of Hollywood in the star-making machine during Hollywood's golden age and into the latter years. Carson knew a thing or two about how studios valued beauty over brains. Carson's list comprises a majority of actors known not simply for their acting chops, but for their remarkable good looks, which studios were well aware of when they chose them. Carson noted a marked change in Hollywood stars, from Tufts and Curtis, stars of old with their machine-made images, to stars in today's America, such as Gabor, famous purely for being herself. The format of The Tonight Show, which called for unplugged conversations, had shortcomings in films polished to a high sheen, making Carson a one-of-a-kind observer. However, Carson remained a deeply respectful professional in the entertainment industry despite his scathing private opinions. He could appreciate a performance such as Laurence Olivier in Hamlet and Zsa Zsa being Zsa Zsa, provided it did not try to mask a shallowness. His roll call of awful actors was not simply a soap opera tidbit. Rather, it was a considered professional opinion of a veteran of the industry in matters of authenticity. Ultimately, Carson's assessment can be read as a reflection of a Hollywood golden age concerning talent and appearance inextricably intertwined from a television viewing perspective of a lifetime of entertainment history.